We inherited multiple sclerosis from shepherds and Alzheimer's from hunter-gatherers. A huge database of ancient genomes has allowed scientists to determine the origin of many genetic features found in modern Europeans, including diseases. Research shows that the same genes that cause multiple sclerosis may have protected nomadic herders against animal-borne pathogens thousands of years ago. In turn, genetic variants that increased the risk of developing diabetes, which were brought to Europe by hunter-gatherer peoples, may have helped them survive famine. Europe was settled by modern humans in three main waves. First, hunter-gatherer societies arrived on the continent from Asia. This happened around 45,000 years ago. Then, about 11,000 years ago, farmers came from the Middle East. Finally, shepherds and cattle breeders arrived in Europe. They came from the steppes of Western Asia and the edge of Eastern Europe some 5,000 years ago. Archaeologists and historians have assumed that these groups mixed throughout the continent, and that the populations in each place evolved distinct characteristics in response to the local environment. But when geneticist Willeslav from the University of Cambridge in the UK and his team began examining the genomes of ancient humans, they discovered that that was not all. Scientists managed to create a European family tree and migration map that revealed how genomic characteristics in a specific location changed as populations moved over time. The results and description of the research were published in a series of publications in the journal Nature. Scientists collected and sequenced DNA from 317 ancient skeletons found over the years in Europe. The human remains examined ranged from 3,000 to 11,000 years old. They added existing data on more than 1,300 other ancient Europeans to the group under analysis. The project aimed to compare ancient DNA, which was taken from the teeth and bones of ancient Europeans, with modern material from the UK Biobank, which includes the health and DNA histories of over 430,000 people. Contemporary Britons. Thanks to this, scientists were able to trace prehistoric migrations and communities carrying specific genetic variants. By comparing genetic markers, age and burial place of the remains, scientists were able to determine the genetic legacy left by the Great Migrations to Europe. The research provides unprecedented details about how ancient migrations can still influence many human characteristics and the risk of certain diseases to this day. The findings provide evidence that some of the regional variation in some features was due to differences in the dispersal patterns of communities arriving in Europe. This contradicts the view that genetic differences arose mainly as a result of adaptation to conditions in specific locations in Europe. Analyses of ancient samples have allowed researchers to show when and where key genetic variants first appeared, and to infer how changes in ancestral origins and selection pressures such as disease might explain them. Researchers showed that shepherds and cattle breeders went mainly to northern parts of Europe, while farmers from the Middle East went south and west. These migrations completely replaced existing populations in some places. For example, Denmark has undergone 2 major population transitions in just a few generations. Willerslev says archaeological evidence and the speed of change suggest that the newcomers killed all the locals, rather than driving them out or mixing with them. The dispersal patterns of ancient migration waves reaching Europe mean that many modern Europeans have some genetic ancestry from all three waves of major migrations. But many characteristics have a direct link to one of the three waves. For example, modern Northern Europeans are taller and have lighter skin than Southern Europeans. The authors of the study indicate that this is due to a greater number of genes coming from shepherds and cattle breeders. In turn, people in northeastern Europe, who inherited more genetic material from hunter-gatherer societies, have a greater risk of developing diabetes and Alzheimer's disease. As newcomers settled in geographically isolated areas of Europe, these variants became established in individual populations. There is a striking difference in a number of characteristics, such as skin and eye color. Diet and mental health, said study co-author Evan Irving Pease. Subtle differences in origin have a clear impact. The legacy of these groups is still present among modern people, he adds. Surprisingly, one trait that appears to have a strong evolutionary advantage is that associated with a predisposition to multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis affects some populations more severely than others. It is similar with some other diseases. It is estimated that Scandinavians are 17 times more likely to develop this disease than those in sub-Saharan Africa. This feature came to Europe with shepherds from Western Asia and over the next millennia became common in Northern Europe. Multiple sclerosis is a devastating disease caused by an overactive immune system attacking the nervous system. Willerslev, however, argues that an unusually strong immune system or related genetic variants may have helped ancient humans survive ancient plagues and common pathogens of the time. This is the best explanation we have, says Willerslev. Variants in these genes were likely beneficial in the past, but became problematic in the last century when the advent of vaccines and sanitation reduced exposure to dangerous pathogens. This is a compelling illustration of the hypothesis that today's high incidence of autoimmune diseases is, at least in part, the result of past selection for survival against infectious diseases, says Luis Quintana Murchi of the Pasteur Institute. But it is not everything. For example, a gene variant that now causes a higher risk of diabetes, high cholesterol, appears more frequently in samples from about 12,000 years ago. And may have helped Ice Age hunter-gatherer societies survive famine. Later waves of migration introduced other variants into the gene pool of modern Europeans, associated with the ability to survive on a more vegetarian diet. In turn, genetic variants that increase the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease may have increased fertility in women. The moon is full of caves. How to use them? Since 2009, when lava caves were first described on the lunar surface, various concepts for their use have emerged. Locating a base in such a place would protect astronauts from radiation and meteorites, while providing direct access to the lunar surface. However, there is a risk that the caves and the corridors leading to them could collapse. The issues of the durability of their ceilings are examined by Dr. Eng. Marcin Kowala from the Wrocław University of Science and Technology. NASA and other space agencies are vocal about exploring the Moon and its resources. The basic element in achieving this goal is finding a safe shelter for future astronauts. Because the surface of the silver globe is an extreme environment, the caves on the Moon described in 2009 seem to be an ideal place for a future lunar base. Our natural satellite is not a hospitable place for humans. Surface temperatures range from over 100 degrees Celsius to as low as -180 degrees Celsius, depending on whether it is night or day. The Moon has no atmosphere or magnetic field, so astronauts on its surface have to deal with approximately 200 times higher doses of cosmic radiation than people on Earth. The lack of an atmosphere, in turn, means that the surface is exposed to constant bombardment with micrometeorites, which in the case of Earth simply burn up in the atmosphere and do not even reach the surface. In 2009, a publication appeared describing depressions and pits discovered on the lunar surface. Some of them are probably lava corridors, created when the silver globe was volcanically active, the ceilings of which collapsed. Due to low gravity, these corridors can be up to several hundred meters wide. Some may lead to even deeper caves that would be ideal for sheltering astronauts. But the mentioned corridors, under the influence of gravity and other factors, such as meteorite impacts, may collapse, creating extensive collapses. The topic of the strength of the ceilings of lava corridors, the stability of lunar caves and the analysis of collapses was dealt with by Dr. Eng. Marcin Kowala from the Faculty of Civil and Water Engineering of the Wrocław University of Science and Technology in cooperation with Japanese scientists, Professor Goro Komatsu and Dr. Junichi Hariyama. They presented the effects of their work in a publication in the Icarus magazine. Dr. Marcin Kowala began his research on this topic in 2022. Relying primarily on data obtained by space probes examining the Moon's surface and studies presenting the geometry of the already measured debris, we read in a press release sent by the Wrocław University of Science and Technology. There are no detailed studies of any cave on the Moon, so the team of scientists used, among others, from laser scans of a lava cave located in the Canary Islands. Analyzing the stability of any geological structure on the Moon is extremely difficult. We can only rely on estimated parameters, and the use of advanced methods to describe rock strength is pointless in this case. However, we have a very valuable thing at our disposal, i.e. collapses on the Moon, the geometry of which we already know, explains Dr. Eng. In the release, Marcin Kowala. As we read further, the publication proposed the so-called backward approach. Scientists analyze a lot of model cross-sections, checking the obtained examples of rock falls and using the available information, adjusting the results to the parameters of rock falls observed on the Moon, as admitted by Dr. Eng. Thank you. This approach is new and allows you to determine the sizes of caves that are responsible for specific collapses at a specific thickness of the rock ceiling. He also adds that the data obtained in this way are, to some extent, estimates. For the purposes of the publication, we analyzed the 3 largest debris, although there are many more on the Moon. However, not everyone can accurately measure the geometry, e.g. the thickness of the ceiling, he notes. According to Dr. Enge, the glorious concept of a lunar base in lava caves is a very interesting alternative to building surface bases. The scientist indicates that this has enormous scientific potential. In the caves we can find an intact environment that holds a lot of information related to the formation of the Moon and, therefore, the Solar System. During the Apollo missions carried out in the 1960s and 1970s, soil samples were taken from a depth of 3 meters. And on this basis it was possible to map several 100 million years of solar activity. Please think how much information could be obtained from caves, he emphasizes. An additional advantage of underground bases is protection against the already mentioned meteorites and against large temperature fluctuations. In research from 2022, scientists determined that partially shaded pits and caves constantly maintain temperatures suitable for the functioning of the human body. There are many caves on the Moon. How much? No one knows this. It is very difficult to estimate, but there may be quite a lot of them, especially in areas with basalt seas and large impact craters through which lava flowed, explains Drive. Koala. There are over 200 known cave-ins, but, as the researcher points out, not all of them have to be related to lava caves. What caused the extinction of the largest primates in history? The largest known primate became extinct several 100,000 years ago. Gigantopithecus black-eye, as we are talking about it, reached a height of 3 meters and weighed about 300 kilograms. Until now, it was not known why this species became extinct. In a new study, scientists say the giant ape's failure to adapt to its changing environment ultimately sealed its fate. Standing 3 meters tall and weighing approximately 200 to 300 kilograms, Gigantopithecus black-eye was the largest primate to ever walk the Earth. He lived in what is now China and India. In 1935, anthropologist Gustav von Koenigswald found its tooth in a traditional medicine shop in Hong Kong, sold as dragon's tooth. Since then, researchers have discovered 4 jaw bones and about 2,000 teeth in caves across China, but no other parts of the skeleton have been found, making it much more difficult to create an accurate picture of G. black-eye, let alone the circumstances that led to its extinction. We simply don't know much about it, says Kira Westerway, co-author of the study published in the journal Nature, from Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia. Scientists estimated the height and weight of the largest primate in history by comparing its unusually large molars with those of other primates. The teeth also shed light on something else. Researchers initially assumed that G. black-eye looked more like a gorilla. However, in a 2019 study, they determined that fragments of tooth protein indicated its genetic relationship to orangutans. This discovery made the extinction of the largest ape even more intriguing, mainly because they lived in areas that also housed the orangutan species Pongo weidenreachi, whose relatives survive to this day in Southeast Asia. So why did history's largest apes become extinct while their smaller relatives survived? To solve the mystery, Westaway, together with Yingqi Zhang from the Institute of Vertebrate Paleontology and Paleoanthropology of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, and other researchers analyzed monkey fossils. Sediment samples from 22 caves in southern China in which G. black eye bones or related fossils were found were also analyzed. The study used 6 different dating methods to establish the exact time frame for the species' extinction. The environment of the giant ape from the period before its extinction was also recreated using a number of techniques, such as pollen analysis and analyses of sediment layers under a microscope. The researchers also analyzed chemical traces in tooth enamel to see how the monkey's diet changed over time. They applied similar analyses to the teeth of its close relative, the orangutan Pongo weidenreachi. The results showed that the species Gigantopithecus blacki became extinct between 295,000 and 215,000 years ago, slightly later than earlier estimates of 420,000 and 330,000 years ago. During its heyday, approximately 2.3 million years ago, the landscape was covered with dense forests. By analyzing teeth from the species' heyday, using tooth wear textures and trace element analysis, the team created a model of the monkey's behavior during its heyday compared to its extinction period. Teeth provide astonishing insight into a species' behavior, indicating stress, diversity of food sources and repetitive behavior, says Renaud Joannes Boyo of Southern Cross University in Australia. Analyzing pollen in ancient settlements, scientists noticed that around 700,000 up to 600,000 years ago, the environment underwent a huge change. The forests became more and more open as seasonal changes intensified. Conditions were drier. Bushes and meadows began to dominate the landscape. Gigantopithecus's favorite food has become rare. Access to water was also worse. Dental analyses indicate that during this time the species was forced to adopt a less nutritious diet of bark and twigs as its favorite forest foods and water sources dwindled. There are also fewer fossils from this period, indicating population decline. In turn, analyses of the teeth of the ancestor of today's orangutans indicate that this species had no problems adapting to changes. Westaway suspects that the ancient orangutan may have climbed trees to obtain food unavailable to G. blacki, which was too massive and unlikely to be suitable for climbing. The fossils also showed that during this time, G. blacki grew larger, while P. weidenreachi became smaller, making it more agile. Analyses also showed that the orangutan relative had expanded its diet to include shoots and leaves, insects and small animals, something the largest primate in history had failed to do. The Indian Aditya-L1 mission has reached its destination. The satellite begins observing the Sun. After a 4-month journey, The Indian Aditya-L1 spacecraft has reached its destination at Lagrange Point 1, where it will measure and observe the outermost layers of the Sun. The Aditya-L1 mission was launched in September last year and carries an array of instruments to measure and observe the outermost layers of the Sun. The probe was named after the Hindu sun deity. She flew 1.5 million kilometers to reach her destination. However, this is still only 1% of the distance between Earth and our star. Lagrange Point 1 is the place where the gravitational forces of the Sun and the Earth balance, allowing it to remain in a relatively stable orbit around the Sun. The main advantage of placing the observatory in this place is a constant, unobstructed view of the Sun. This will provide greater benefit from real-time observations of solar activity and its impact on space weather. The presence of the probe at point L1 also allows you to minimize maneuvers related to keeping the equipment in the right place, thereby reducing fuel consumption. This point is located outside the Earth's magnetosphere, making it suitable for sampling the solar wind in situ. Placing the observatory in L1 was a key phase of the mission. This required precise navigation and control. This success demonstrates ISRO's capabilities in such complex orbital maneuvers. The Indian Space Research Organization (ISRO) mission is the first Indian space mission to explore the Sun. The Aditya-L1 spacecraft will focus on studying solar flares, coronal mass ejections and the mysterious extreme heat of the solar corona. India runs a relatively low-budget space program, but its size and dynamics are impressive. In 2008, ISRO sent the first probe to the lunar orbit. In 2014, the agency placed a spacecraft in orbit around Mars. Last August, India became the fourth country to land on the Moon and the first to achieve the feat near the Silver Globe's South Pole. During the Chandrayaan-3 mission, sulfur, aluminum, calcium, iron, chromium, titanium, manganese, silicon and oxygen were detected on the surface of our natural satellite. In addition, the Vikram lander detected movement beneath the lunar surface. The Aditya-L1 mission is expected to last 5 years. ISRO said some of the instruments on board have already started working, collecting data and taking images. However, the agency did not reveal how much the Aditya mission cost, but the Indian press reports the amount to be around $46 million. The probe was equipped with 7 scientific instruments. According to ISRO, the observatory will focus on studying solar flares, coronal mass ejections and the mysterious extreme heat of the solar corona. Scientists want to better understand the factors that influence space weather. They are also interested in better understanding the dynamics of the solar wind. The scientific instruments on board the spacecraft include 2 X-ray spectrometers that will study the properties of solar flares, a coronagraph that will record images of the Sun to detect flares occurring on its surface, and an instrument to measure solar radiation. In the bowels of the observatory there are 2 more instruments for studying the solar wind and its components, and a magnetometer for measuring magnetic fields.